Turn off your lights. Make sure your doors and windows are locked. Things are about to get spooky. It'll be about 10 minutes. By Refrigerator North 663. That's what the hostess told me. The restaurant looked busy. It was Friday night after all, and I probably should have made a reservation. But 10 minutes? That was a steal. It was a steal, but not for me. About 10 minutes passed, and I stood from the small pad bench in the alternate room and looked over to where the hostess was standing behind the lectern, but instead found her gone. What I did see was about 20 feet behind it was an older woman sitting at one of the tables inside the restaurant. She had a fork and knife in her hand and what looked like a nice lamb with mashed potatoes and asparagus on her plate. My first instinct would have been to toss around the idea of ordering that myself. However, that was interrupted by her eyes. She was staring at me, mouth agape, and it looked like she was crying. I blinked twice and still saw her sitting there, her hand turned towards me. I quickly sat down on the bench again and pretended to look at my phone. I opened and closed the weather app about 5 times, hoping beyond hope the hostess would notify me that my table was ready and escort me away from the gaze of that woman. As I was just about to click the app open again, somehow forgetting what tomorrow's forecast was, I heard the hostess' voice and a wave of relief washed over me. As she led me to my table, I stole a gaze at the seated old woman and saw her putting her fork with a lamb on it into her mouth. Sitting down, I was overjoyed that my table was on the far side of the room, with a small half wall blocking my direct sight between us. I was handed the menu. The text of it seemed to induce an optimistic amnesia. Again, my only concern was which appetizer would be best paired with a main course. I was still undecided when the outline of a figure standing on the other side of the table round the edge of the menu. It was a sommelier, although he did not offer any wines. Instead, I was greeted by a blank, sunken expression, staring idly deep into my core. I stared for about 5 seconds, saying nothing before blinking. When I opened my eyes a split second later, he was gone. I quickly began to look around. I saw other tables with couples and families all dining happily, soft jazz music playing, and waiters walking around with plates and menus and describing the night's special. Nothing was out of place. Everything was totally ordinary. Laying the menu on the table, I stood to head to the bathroom. Once inside, I splashed some water on my face from the sink, suddenly feeling very hot. I took a minute to normalize my breathing and look myself in the mirror. After telling myself that I was imagining things, that it had been a stressful week and I needed a break, and that this weekend would be my time to do absolutely nothing. Gradually, I felt better, even happier, remembering that I finally had some time off and could treat myself. But this time I was walking out of the bathroom, I had nearly forgotten why I felt the need to go in there in the first place. The first thing I noticed when I stepped out of the restroom was that it was totally silent. The second thing I noticed was that everyone was staring at me, blank, sunken eyes. I ran, sprinted actually. I nearly tore my leather loafers because of how fast I was moving. I had no thoughts in my head except to leave and to do so as quickly as possible. I ran, sprinted actually. I nearly tore my leather loafers because of how fast I was moving. I had no thoughts in my head except to leave and to do so as quickly as possible. I didn't take a look around or back, and in about 15 seconds, I was outside the restaurant and starting up my car. I skidded back and slammed the shifter into drive, and after no less than a minute of exiting the bathroom, I was doing 80 on the highway. I spent the entire weekend in a near panic state at home, not stepping a foot outside my door. It's Monday morning now, and the last thing in the world I would want to do is go out there. I finally faced my accuser after being acquitted and released from prison after 20 years. My accuser, who was now an elderly white lady, said to me, "Honey, I'm so sorry for falsely accusing you, and I knew you were innocent, but you fit the description because you're black." Advice for Meeting Your Doppelganger by Square Review 4637. Please note, some information may be redacted for the sake of anonymity. Hello, my name is Redacted, and I'm from a small rural town just outside of Redacted. I'm writing this post today to give advice to anyone who has ever experienced or will one day experience a situation in which you meet your doppelganger. Meet your doppelganger on the surface level sounds like something very scary. We've all heard the internet memes that go something like, if you see any person that looks identical to you, run away and hide. But that's not really necessary. Everyone's doppelganger experience will be different. It's akin to having a random roommate in college. You could have a great experience and really gel with a person, or they will threaten to kill you and have you lying awake at night fearing for your life. The chances you will come in contact with your doppelganger is very high, with chances increasing slightly after you turn 25 years old. Personally, I met my doppelganger 4 times already, and through my job at Redacted, I feel as though I'm well qualified to give advice to those who haven't met theirs yet. When you meet your doppelganger, you must act like you don't recognize them, even though they will look identical to you. You must wait for them to approach you and introduce themselves. They will usually say something like, "Nice to meet you," or "It's a pleasure to meet you." If they say something negative, or you make eye contact and they never introduce themselves, then you should leave that location immediately. It might be best to drive to your local police station. You can't be too sure they won't follow you. It's also important to note that if you have ever met your doppelganger before, you still have to act like it's your first time meeting, but they will usually bring up the fact that you've met before. I didn't come here just to give advice, I also came to seek it. The other day, the strangest thing happened to me. I was at an outdoor market, and who do I run into buying antique wood spoons but my doppelganger, who I affectionately nickname Redacted, after my own name. She tapped me on the shoulder with her newly purchased spoon and greeted me with a smile, as she had a few times before. "It's great to see you," she said, sticking out her hand. I went to shake it, saying the same thing, but her skin felt ice cold, different than the last time I saw her. She looked around, then dropped her voice in a whisper. "How many times have we met?" Something was off. She seemed nervous. Her eyes kept darting around like she was on lookout for someone. Despite what my brain was telling me to do, replied to my doppelganger that I wasn't sure whether we had met before. I went with my gut instinct and told her the truth. "This would be the 4th time of us meeting each other," I whispered back to her. She breathed out a sigh of relief. "That's what I thought," she replied. She looked around once more before silently walking towards the parking lot. She walked a few more steps before noticing I wasn't following her, as I was still taken aback by the interaction we just had. "Come on," she beckoned me to follow her. I half jogged to meet up with her, thinking about what I would be missing at the market. Organic fruit-flavored honey, hand-knitted quilts sold by a woman who looked no younger than 90, fresh-baked chocolate chip cookies from the vegan booth. Looking back at it now, I wish I'd just stayed and bought my spoon. "Before we go anywhere, can you just tell me what's going on?" I asked. She stared straight ahead, making a beeline for the parking lot. "I will. Which car is yours?" she responded. I wasn't sure I felt comfortable getting into a confined space with my doppelganger. This was the longest interaction we've ever had, and the situation we were in right now didn't make me think we were about to sit down and have a lighthearted chat. "Can you please just tell me what we're doing?" I stopped walking, grasping her wrist so I could get her to stop walking too. She didn't stop though. It was like she was in some sort of trance. She continued walking, but was soon yanked back, with my grip on her wrist acting as an anchor. When she turned around, I noticed her eyes were a little red and puffy, and her cheeks were a bit blotchy. I hadn't noticed until now, but she had actually been crying as soon as we started speaking. As she faced me, her eyes widened immensely, and she wrenched her wrist away from my grip. I didn't think I had hurt her in any way. I mean, I had grabbed her wrist, but I wasn't Hulk Hogan or something. I started to croak out an "I'm sorry," but I was cut off by a blood-curdling shriek coming from behind me. I realized that my doppelganger was not staring at me, but past me, and I reluctantly turned around to see the source of the scream. At first, I saw nothing. Just families milling around the market and a young girl attempting to walk two Great Danes without tripping. As I watched the girl attempt to train the dogs, I noticed a thumping sound. I scanned the horizon, the sound getting faster and heavier as I looked for it. When I finally saw it, I gasped. I felt like someone had knocked the wind out of me, but I shouldn't have. This sight would have been nothing out of the ordinary for me, maybe a little jarring at first, but nothing I couldn't rationalize, had it not been for who I was with. Running full speed towards me from the woods was a young woman in her mid-redacted, her long, tattered, redacted hair whipped behind her. She was in a hospital gown that was streaked with blood, and as she got closer, I noticed she had a small scar across redacted. The woman was me. It was my doppelganger, but I knew it wasn't. I turned around, redacted, and I had the same look of horror plastered across our faces. "We have to go," she choked out between sobs, and this time I didn't wait for an explanation. The two of us made a break for my car, not stopping to see if we were still being chased. I went for the driver's side door, but she stopped me, saying, "I know where we need to go. I'll drive. You can be the lookout." I didn't argue, even though I usually didn't feel comfortable with other people driving my car, even though technically I would still be driving it. I ran over to the passenger side and flew open the door, wrenching as it slammed to the car next to me. In other circumstances, I would have left a note, but I couldn't waste any time. For someone who I assumed didn't drive much, my doppelganger managed to speed out of the parking lot surprisingly quick. As she was driving, I began to rack my brain trying to figure out what I had just seen. A third doppelganger? I had never heard of anything like this, neither in my personal life nor at work. And how did my original doppelganger know about this? Is she involved? So I have a confession to make. I'm not writing this post to give advice. I'm actually asking for it fully. I have to introduce this and write it under the pretense of giving advice because it was the only way she wouldn't get suspicious. My doppelganger and I have been driving in circles around the entrance of the woods where I saw the third doppelganger. She's not speaking me, just humming to herself occasionally and looking into the woods as we drive by. She's driving with her left hand, and in her right hand is a wooden spoon that she bought. She keeps tapping the armrest with it. The tap is usually slow, but every time we pass the area where we first saw the doppelganger, the tap rapidly speeds up. I don't know what to do. I don't know if I can trust her. Do I get out of the car? Do I tell my work about the third doppelganger? If anyone has a similar experience, I really need your advice. When my nephew showed up at my door unannounced and covered in blood, I asked him what had happened. With unrestrained excitement, he replied, "Remember when you said I could live with you if my parents died?" And with that, our time together is coming to an end. If you have a story that you would like me to consider narrating, either true or fiction, you can send them to me either through my subreddit, my website, or I have an email as well. All of them are down below for easy access. Secondly, I'd like to thank the people who help support this channel, my patrons and members. Thank you guys so much. Their names are on screen right now if you're watching the video. Last but never least, I'd like to thank the writers who let me read their stories this evening. And I did forget last week also to thank Phoenix for helping me with the outro a couple weeks ago. My voice was absolutely horrible. And I really thought these two stories go very well together. Two stories about strange circumstances. One where a guy gets to a restaurant and everything just seems really off. And then, well, we meet your doppelganger the third time, and they basically kidnap you in your own car. Which makes me wonder, why? Why was them meeting them 3 times so strange? And why was that woman crying in the restaurant? If you got ideas, I'd love to read them down below. And I would also like to thank you guys for waiting for me to get my voice back. I kinda had it back last week, not enough that I could fully narrate, but I also didn't have the energy to even sit down and put together a video. I had been very drained from having to do my day job, and then putting this on top of it just was too much for me to even ask of myself. So the compilations were really the easiest thing for me to do. They do take work, but not as much, and it was easier to talk myself into that, basically. Also, a little announcement, I have decided when I'm going to have my live streams, my Stream and Terrors officially. They'll be Saturday nights at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for you guys from now on. I also know that my voice sounds really good in these narrations, but that's because I had some saved up in what I call my vault, for in case I got sick or busy with my new job. So this outro is actually more of a good indication how well my voice actually sounds now. It's almost there, but it's not quite yet, and it might take about a month for it or 2 to even get fully to what I was at before, because last time I got this kind of sick, it took about a month or 2 for it to fully heal. It's just because, well, I have to use my voice to work and to narrate. But if you enjoyed these stories, please hit that like button and make sure it feels it. If you're new, well, please subscribe and turn that pretty little bell to all notifications. And I would love a comment. Tell me what you thought about these stories, any theories you might have, or even what kind of stories you would like to see in the future. I absolutely love reading your guys' comments. If you're on the podcast and are able to, please leave a review, and if you're on Spotify, there are questions you can answer, and you can also use that section as your comments as well. And if you'd like to help this podcast/channel grow, please share this with anyone who might enjoy it. It helps quite a bit, and I always love seeing new faces/new comments, and seeing what new people are interested in. If you'd like to help in other ways, like the people I mentioned before, I do have Patreon and memberships, where for $1 a month you get early access and a couple other bonuses. But if you'd just like to do a tip or a one-time donation, I do have PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, and Super Thanks on YouTube. All that stuff is extremely appreciated, but never expected, guys. As always, just having you guys watch/listen has always meant the world to me. I just like knowing that I narrate for people who enjoy my narrations. Sleep tight and don't let 42 bite.